going to do is, I actually promised you guys last year that I would take you to the next level this year, right? So, can y'all remember anything I said last year?
Yes. Key
Yeah, yeah. I think what I'll do is we'll do some review for sure of what we did last year, and then we'll just basically take that. What I'm going to do is, as we're reviewing, if you do remember a lot of what we talked about last year, that's going to come into play when we start talking about chords outside of the key. Right? That's kind of what we talked about doing this year, was doing some of that. So hopefully we'll take care of everybody. I'll just we're here for you, so just let me know what you need, and we'll go with it. Basically what I want to do. Oh, how many of you are taking my mandolin class as well? Anybody taking that one too? You are. Okay. Are you playing tenor? Yes. Okay. Oh, you did. Okay. What I'm going to do in both classes is basically talk about creating solos. I mean, that's really what we're doing. You can call it improvising if you want to. I mean, creating a solo is one thing. In other words, you could take a song like Oh Susanna. You could go home and spend a week and create an arrangement for Oh Susanna, or you could start playing Oh Susanna and improvise in time, and you'd be creating the solo on the spot, right? And so either way, what we're going to talk about today is how to create solos, but it's going to apply to both. I mean, ideally, you know, what I do is I improvise, and ideally that's what you would do, but you don't have to. Great 6-string player Russ Barenberg. Can you say 6-string? Can you even say 6-string this weekend? Russ Barenberg said, you know, if I give you an arrangement and say come back in a week with an arrangement, if you can't do that, you certainly can't improvise. But it's the starting place for all of it. Let me just play a quick fiddle tune here, just to kind of show you what I do, in case some of you don't know my style. But because everything I play right now will be kind of what we're going to talk about today, or at least some of the aspects of it. That's a fiddle tune, but obviously any kind of that scale-oriented stuff is what we're going to talk about today. So, when you, I know some of you are in C, and anybody in G tuning, a couple of you may, it doesn't really matter. But I think what we'll do, if it's okay with everybody, is, well, maybe it'd be easier for me to just do this out of C and I could capo up. What we want to do is just to take one key and talk about everything out of that key. You're in C? Because the concept is, if you can do one key, then you can translate that to the others, right? There's 12 keys, but that would be a little bit overwhelming for 1 hour class. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the idea of playing in the key of C, all right? Anytime you approach any tune, you're going to have a chord progression that comes at you, right? And most of what we do, probably a lot of you, including me, we play what music that falls under the folk music sort of umbrella, which may be any kind of what we typically think of as folk music, you know, ballad type tunes, country music, old time music, any of that kind of stuff. Usually you're only going to run into about 3 chords most of the time. You might run into a couple others, and what we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the chords that will generally belong to a key and how you survive that. I'm all about the word survival these days. In other words, if I'm playing a tune with John Lawler, I'm just trying to survive, right? Because I'm just trying to get through the tune and not be humiliated, right? So survival is the word that I use a lot today. The first thing that you're going to do, this is probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you, is when you run into a chord progression, you don't know what to do over the chords. If you can play the chords, the 3 notes that make up a chord are what we call the arpeggio. Okay, so we're in C here. Right here, I'm just making an open, you know, an open C chord, right? All these notes that make up the C chord are in play. So if the tune is in C and the guys, you know, your rhythm player's playing a C chord. What I can do is now I've got my chord, it's going to be 100% of the time correct that if I play any one of those notes, it will be correct. So if you're playing along blah blah blah, right, always 100% of the time, okay? The song changes to a C chord, or an F chord. A couple of ways, different ways of making an F, as you see that was it. Alright, all you got to do is make the chord, those notes, right? So say like, it's the wrong key for me to sing it, but well, the circle being broken by and by, Lord, by and by. Okay. At this point in your life, you may not be able to, you know, pick out the melody notes of that tune and play them right away. We'll get to that here in a few minutes, but what I can do is if I don't know what else to do and I'm just trying to, again, survive, I'm trying to play a solo that will work over those chords. Then I could go, all right, somebody sung the thing through one time, somebody says take a solo, I could go 1, 2, 3. I see how I just changed the chord and you could probably hear it change in your ear when it went by there. What happens is, even though on the tenor guitar things kind of get funky as far as the way they're voiced, you basically just have 3 notes that make up a chord. The root, here's C, and then again things can get funky because of where they lie, but here's the third, just the 3rd note of the scale, right? And then the 5th would be D, so you kind of got all 3 of them right there, they're just inverted, right? All right? And so then when you go to C, it's the same idea. You'd have the root, the 3rd, and you could figure all this out. I didn't learn to play academically. In other words, the way I'm going to teach you today is I have no other choice but to use academic terms. Otherwise, I've got to say you got to play for 15 years, right, and figure this stuff out. So sometimes it can get the sound a little bit harsh. And just know that I learned all this stuff by playing. I did not learn it by academia. And Lawler is the same way. It's kind of interesting, but all right. So we're just trying to survive. So, but the default is always going to be that you play what we call the arpeggio, any note that's in the chord. Okay. If you were to run into a minor chord, if you know any chord, doesn't matter what it is, make the chord, you'll be 100% correct all the time. All right. Now, before we move on to some of the concepts of a full scale, let me just throw a couple things at you. This will be kind of elementary for some of you, but when it comes to creating solos, this is something we'll develop more in the mandolin class. But I can take any note. Let's just say here I've got a this is a C note, right? 4th string, 5th fret. Let's just say I want to play that note. Well, I can just play the note. But and when we talk about how to sort of alter that note to make it more interesting or just to change it a little bit, again, some of this will be real elementary for some of you, but I could slide into it. Right? You could always alter the note that way. You can hammer it. Same kind of sound, but but it can actually be a little bit different because sometimes you'll have the fluidness of the slide will be a different tone, right? Okay. I can also pull it off, and this is what when I started playing 5-string banjo as a kid, pull-offs to me were so difficult that I just quit. I just said I can't do this, but it turns out they're not too bad. So I'm playing G note, so I could pull a D note. Right, so like if I put my first finger on the C note, I could pull it off with either one of those fingers. Right, that's another way I could arrive at that note. Right, like if I were playing Will the Circle Be Unbroken? There's a hammer, slide, pull it off. Right. Again, that's just one note, so you can alter notes all throughout the whole melody that way. And that's how you can start to get a little bit of interest, right? Another thing we can do is what we call neighboring notes. And this is kind of the same concept as a hammer or a slide, but it's what jazz guys call enclosure. And that's where when I can play this single note, say I'm going to arrive at that note, I can play a note in front of it, I can play a note after it. This is in the scale, right? So there's my note. So what I would do is I'm trying to arrive at that note, so I can play, and now I have arrived. And we call that enclosure or neighboring notes, right? You can also play, when it comes to the concept of neighboring notes, you could also play an idea like this. So I got my note, and I've got my neighboring note here, so I can play Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Right? I can play right. It can sound a little squirrely sometimes if you do it too much. I'm overemphasizing it now to get the point across, but right. So there I kind of use both of them. Right. So that's neighboring note. So hammers, pull off, slides, neighboring notes, and then you've got the arpeggio itself. All right. You also could play as you're playing along. You can do sort of like a Maybelle Carter style. You know, she played a 6-string guitar with. She played the melody and then play chords. You know, with it. It's a little harder to do on tenor, and you wouldn't necessarily. You know, apply that exact style, but you could throw strums in. So let's say I might play right. I mean, it's the idea of just throwing in a chord, a full chord, and it can really fill it up, especially if you're playing a more of a solo type thing, which is what I'll be doing a lot of this weekend. So that's. When you talk about creating solos, you can always throw the chord itself in. Now earlier we talked about playing the arpeggio, which is the same idea, but when I play a chord as a chord where I'm playing all the notes sort of at the same time, that's not going to be like an arpeggio where I'm playing the single notes. It's just two different ideas, right? Okay. Okay, so let's move on to let me throw one more thing at you before we talk about the full major scale. And this is going to be a lot of information for an hour, and I realize that. So just you know, take what you can, and you can. I'm here all day, so if you need to ask me about it. Is everybody okay so far? Any questions so far? Everybody good? All right. I think before we move to the full 7-note scale, let's look at the major pentatonic, which some of you may be sort of familiar with. What I want to do is. Everybody make a C chord, all right? And if you're in G, you would just capo like me. Yeah, cool. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to play the arpeggio notes for G, or for C on the bottom end here. All right. So, so just play your 4th string open. All right. That's going to be the root. That's going to be C. All right. And then if you play the 4th fret, that same string, you got E, all right? And then you play the 3rd string open, you got G, okay? may not see that as a chord because of the way it lays out, but it actually is a chord. You just can't play those notes in this particular place at the same time, right? Okay. So, and just bear with me as I'm translating everything from G for me. So just bear with me. But so C, E, G, right? So that's the arpeggio for C. So we talk about surviving C. We're playing, you know, will the circle be unbroken? Right? So, any of you that have had any kind of training at all, if your teacher told you to work on arpeggios and scales, it drives you crazy, right? But that's just the way music's made up. Now, if you think that, if you think that playing arpeggios is cheating, or it's a cheap way of sliding by and the lazy way out, you are unpatriotic, because our national anthem is an arpeggio, and you cannot say that it's not a great melody, or we have to throw you out. So there are legitimate ways of creating solos, and what you're going to find is that when you are searching for melody notes, most of the time they're going to come out of that arpeggio. We'll elaborate a little bit more on that. But right, so now you've got your survival, your arpeggio for the key of C there, right? So what I want to do now is I want to add one more thing to it. And so you got 3 notes there. So what we want to do is add 2 more notes, and we're going to have a 5-note scale called the major pentatonic scale. Okay. So what we're going to have is now same idea. We're going to start with C, and then we'll have D. Just like you're walking straight up the scale. That's the 2nd fret open. Okay. All right. 4th fret. And now what we're going to do, that's the 3rd. Remember, that was part of the arpeggio we just played. So what we're doing is adding 2 notes to the arpeggio. Now you're going to skip the 4. We're going to get rid of that. That's not going to happen. We're going to go straight to the 5, which is G. And then we're going to play A, which is the 6. So the scale is, if you were to count it from the, pick the notes out of the 7-note scale, you'd have 1, 2, 3, just like you're starting a scale, then you go 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Okay. Or my girl, right? And there I just went back to the octave G there, so it's still just a 5-note scale. Okay? Now you may be saying, what good is that? Why should I go to the trouble of learning a 5-note scale when I can just go ahead and learn the 7-note scale? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but when you get into the good question, right? There was one guy who said, I was teaching a class in Texas. He said, why can I not just play the major pentatonic all the time? And I said, well, it might not be the most interesting thing you can play all the time. He said, the people I play for would find it interesting all the time. So why can I not just do it? I said, well, maybe your crowd does. Maybe all they need is 5 notes, you know? That's right. What happens is, for those of you who care, and I assume you would, but if you play a 7-note scale, there's the major 7, 7th note of the scale. There's the flat 7. There's a 7, and I flat it. We'll talk a little bit about that toward the end of the class. What you do with that 7th note of the scale can create unspeakable horror. I mean, it can create all kinds of trouble. So what we do is we throw it out. I mean, that's really what we've done. We just get rid of it, so let's not deal with it. And the same thing with the 4 here. But there's another thing about those 2 notes. When I play, there's the major 7, here's my root. That's a half step away, and some of you guys probably know that, right? It's a half step away. Here's my 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 is also half step away. Those notes that are half step away we're getting rid of, and they create a lot of tension. So here's this major 7. Right? You can hear that little bit of rub. That's great for jazz. For John Lawler's going to love that sound. And we all love it for certain situations, but it's this dissonance that you don't want to keep all the time. You want to try to resolve it. I play a lot of bluegrass, and the way we create tension is by traveling with 5 guys in a van through Georgia with no air conditioning in August. Yeah, we try not to create tension with our music. We create it with our personalities. But different thing. Anyway, so we get rid of those notes, and you know, if you listen to some players who like to play, like some of these old timers, you guys know that they're playing like old country music or whatever, they will avoid those notes that we're talking about. And you go, well, did somebody teach them the minor pentatonic or major pentatonic? No, they didn't. The fact is, your ear, when you play enough, you're going to hear those notes and it's going to disturb you, and you will avoid them, and that's really how a lot of times these things get developed, right? So what happens with this scale is, I'm not going to linger on it, but I can then use it in almost every place that I have a major chord. So, and I have the same kind of freedom with it. Like, we know that the arpeggio is going to be 100% correct all the time. Well, when you're in a major key, let's say we're in C here, and then we're going to F, and then G, right? What I can do is, I'm not gonna go over the major pentatonic for each of those chords, but what I can do is I can play, here's C, and then I go to F, right? And you would just want to find these. Now that you know how the formula is made, you can find 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, right? What's going to happen is then now you're adding 2 more notes to the arpeggio. You're getting a little bit more color, and you're still safe. So if I see a 1, 4, 5 progression, if you just count the scale notes, here's C, right? I go C, C is 1, D, E, F is 4, 1, 4, 5 progression. You got to see it all the time, whether you call it that or not. G is 5. Okay, so any 1, 4, 5 progression now. You've got some things you can do. You can play the arpeggio over every single chord when it changes, or you could now play that particular chord's major pentatonic scale. Okay, all right. Now let's back up and go to the full major scale, which in some ways, believe it or not, is actually easier to keep up with. And this is kind of what I'm about when I teach this class. This is kind of the heart of it. Everybody okay so far? Okay. So let's look at, you wouldn't have to always play your 7-note scale. In other words, if you say, well, I don't know a C scale, major. Well, how many of you do know a C scale? It's okay if you don't, but right. Well, there's 7 notes to the scale. So if you don't know a C scale, you could learn it in 10 minutes and be pretty proficient at it in an hour. So I mean, there's not 170 notes, right? It's just 7. So the goal today is not to teach you a C scale, but I do want you to understand what's going on with it, right? Because this is how you're gonna really create a lot of interest over a lot of different possibilities. All right. So bear with me, as this is kind of the only part of the talk that kind of gets a little bit academic, but I think it's not too bad. All right. So what happens is if I have the 7 notes of the C scale, all right, there's 7, and then I'm back to the octave there. Okay. What I can do is, for every one of those notes, I'm going to attribute a chord. All right. We've already done, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. We've already attributed the 4. There's the 4, and the chord that belongs to that is F, right? F major. And I'll back up here in a second. 5 is G. In other words, we've taken, there's the 5th note of the scale. That's a G, and then the chord that belongs to that is G, right? So this is what I'm getting at. All right. So I got C. The chord that belongs to that is a C major chord. All right. The 2nd note of the scale is D. Now the chord that's going to belong to that is going to be D minor. All right. 3rd note of the scale is E. Chord that's going to belong to that is E minor. In other words, it's either minor or major, right? It could be something crazy like augmented or diminished or something like that, but it's not. So hallelujah. So I've got 1 is major, and this will be your formula. 2 is minor. Remember, there's only 7. Don't be afraid. 3 is minor. 4 is major. That's the F. That's the 4 chord. 5 is G. I'm sorry. Still translating here. 5 is G. That's major. 6 is A minor. So 6 will be minor. And then the 7 is a very weird thing. We talked about how that 7 can be strange. Now that chord actually is diminished. That would be a B diminished. The intervals are a step and a half apart. So that chord is actually diminished. In many forms of music, if you say the word diminished, they throw you out. At the bluegrass festivals I go to, they're guys walking around in suits with Bill Monroe hats. And if they hear you say diminished, you're out. And if you say Earl who, you're gone. Right? It's not necessarily the same for tenor guitar because we do a lot of Texas backup, Texas swing backup, and jazz. So, but what really happens with that B diminished chord there is we're going to throw it out because, again, we're talking about the sort of folk music umbrella where that particular chord is just not going to be a part of everyday vocabulary. And even if it were, it would function in a different way that I'm not going to get into today. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to throw it out because what we're trying to do is we're trying to find all the chords that belong to the key of C, and once we find out what they are, that means we can play a C scale over every one of them. That's where we're headed with this, but this is good news. So what we do is we throw out the B. Throw out the B. All right, so we got C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and then that's it. We got 6. Now, the good news is when you see any of those chords pop up in a song, most of the time it's going to be the 1, 4, 5, right? Anytime you see those pop up, you can play your C scale. Believe it or not. Because they belong to the key of C. The chords themselves are made up of notes that are pulled from the C scale. Okay? That's the real actual reason why it happens. So, hallelujah, what I can do is if I'm improvising, it's even easier than playing the arpeggio for each chord. Because now, if somebody plays C, I can play my C scale. Or any note from the C scale. It goes to F. Sorry, I missed it there. It goes to G. Somebody just play a real simple rhythm like this. Just one of you, maybe you can do it. Just real simple, pretty loud so they can hear you. Okay, just keep playing it. Now go to F. Okay, now go to G. Okay, anyway, you get the idea, right? Just to prove to you that I didn't just come in off the street and start talking. I wanted to show you how that scale works. Now, the next thing will be targeting chord tones, but we're not there yet. Everybody cool with that? See how that works? This is good news, like I said, because now if you see any of those 6 chords, again, you could even see a D minor. You know, the song's going along, it's like, oh, there's a D minor. What do I do over that? Do I play a D minor scale? Not really, no. No, you're going to play a C scale, and it's going to work, I promise. Okay. What I want to do is, before we get too far here, for those of you who are all right with this, I would like to have you do this and just play either one of 2 things. If you don't know a C scale, what you would do is, we're going to play a 1, 4, 5 progression. We're going to play C, F, G. And so I'll play rhythm and you guys will be soloing one at a time. But remember, a good solo does not have to be a bunch of notes. This is probably the hardest thing for me to get across to people. You remember the song that Whitney Houston did that Dolly Parton had done first? And I will always love you. How simple is that? How many millions of albums did that sell, right? You know? But if you were to go, and if you were to play that, you would say that's terrible. I'm a terrible player that I can't come up with anything more interesting than that, you know. But it's not true. And so when I talk about all this stuff, you don't have to blaze along at 4,000 miles an hour. You can just pick one note. But what you're going to do is when the chord changes, just make the chord change. Again, play any note. Goes to G. And just try to use rhythmic ideas. Right? just little simple rhythmic ideas. Now that's if you don't know your C scale. That's always going to be 100% of the correct. If you do know your C scale, just play it or any part of it. And that also will all work itself out. I just want to prove to you that once you get going on this, you're free, and then we'll take it to the next level here in just a second. Okay, so you can pass if you want to, but I want you to all try this if you can. You mind starting? We'll just kind of go along the front row here, and I'll kind of point at people. We'll just take it real slow. Remember, if you say, well, the rhythm is too fast for me, well, that means that you're playing too many notes. Because if I start a rhythm like this, all you have to play is if you want to, right? Okay, let's give it a shot. All right, he's going to start over here 1. Just me playing rhythm, and you can play air guitar till it's your time or whatever if you want to. But everybody understand what we're doing? Everybody cool? Go for it.
It's with not the pentatonic scale, with the regular.
This is a regular scale. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing a full 7-note scale if you know that scale. Otherwise, you're playing arpeggios. Right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here comes F. G. One more time. Yeah, man, it's good. Let it rip, man. You got it. It's good, man.
Doesn't sound right.
Good, do it again. Let's go, you good over here to go? One more time. It's good music. Do it one more time.
What?
Do it one more time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. You're teaching the next workshop. Good, one more time. Yeah, good confident tone, I like that. Cool, yeah. Well, so you see how that works, and that's going to work over, remember, 6 chords. We just did 1, 4, 5. Now, here's one thing I got to warn you about, especially those of you who are pretty good players. Just keep in mind that all this stuff is out the window if you play any note that's not in the scale, right? So if you're playing, it happened to work there, but now watch this. Somebody play a D minor chord. Somebody play a D minor, and sort of just kind of tremolo a little bit so I can hear. All right, here's it. Does that sound good? All right, somebody make an A minor. How's that so far? Yeah. Okay. What happens is any of those blue notes that sound so great over GCD. We're going to talk about those. There's a B flat, it's really cool. That's going to really suck against an A minor or a D minor. That's the chord. That's the note I was just playing over those chords that didn't work. Okay, so just be aware of that all this stuff, it's only for a major scale, right? And this is only going to be a problem for those of you who have already played a lot, because you're going to be used to playing those kind of bluesy things. What's going to happen is if you don't watch it, when you do go to those chords like D minor or E minor, if you continue to play that same blues thing, it won't work. And so what we're talking about here is actually easier than that, because we're just talking about playing a straight major scale that's going to work over 6 different chords. Okay. We're going to talk about what that note belongs to is what we call the major blues, and that's a very useful thing. You just got to make sure you put it in the right place, right? Y'all sound good? All right, just remember to do that anytime you're jamming. If somebody throws a song at you and you've never heard it before, who cares, man? Go for it. Start playing the scale, right? And I encourage you to stay with one key. This would be the key of C, and really get that down before you try to move to something else. I mean, if you're playing all the time, hopefully you are, you're going to be thrown into a situation where you are playing something in the key of G or D or whatever. And I want you to go for it then too. But and remember, you can always survive with arpeggios, right? Let's just say you're working on the key of C, and you got your scale and you're working this thing, and then you haven't worked on D. Well, when somebody throws a song at you in a jam in D, just play arpeggios and then go from there. Maybe build from that into the major pentatonic or whatever. Just find a way to, again, survive any tune, right?
So you're starting your basis that if you start if it's in the key of G, you do the same thing you did in C,
Exactly.
except it's in G.
Exactly.
You just play G. So whatever the key of the song is, that's where you hang your hand.
Yes.
Okay.
And that, to me, that defines the key is what those chords are. In other words, you're playing a G major scale, so then you would go, okay, I know the formula, 1's major, 2's minor, and you would learn what. And a lot of you you're already going to know. You're going to know the 1, 4, 5 for G probably. You may know the 6 minor. There's a few of them you're going to already know, and then from there, there's only 1 or 2 more, the 2 minor and the 3 minor. I mean, sometimes it's not quite as. In some respects, music can be easier than you think it is, and a lot of respects it's not, but but I'm trying to at least show you, as far as getting out there and just playing and not being afraid. You can, if you see guys play tunes and they've never heard, like it's something maybe you wrote, well, and I play a solo over it, you're like, how does he do that? Well, this is how I'm doing it, because I'm anticipating that he probably is going to play a chord that's in the key. If he doesn't, he's going to get me, right? And that's what we're going to talk about toward the end of the day. A lot of this is a review for a couple of you, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying to get through here.
A minor is part of C, right? It's the.
Be the
So
sixth
can
minor.
you still play the same
Yes.
C notes? It still
That's
works
what I'm
with
saying.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any of those 6 chords that we outlined there.
Okay.
C,
Even though they're
G minor.
minors and so on.
Even though they're minors, they
Yeah.
still are the notes that make those up are pulled from that
Still
C
from
scale.
C, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful thing, and so in a lot of ways, it's easier even than trying to play the arpeggio because you don't have to think about anything. You just if you know your scale, you just start going. You know. All right. There's one thing we need to do to refine this just a little bit. Because a lot of you, even you were playing it correctly and you said, well, it doesn't sound right. And so what you were hearing is probably what I'm about to talk about now. Any of the notes of that scale are going to be okay. They're not going to sound completely rotten, you know, as we just proved, right? I mean, if you can play the scale, you'll be okay. But what happens is we need to be able to, on the top of a measure, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 99% of the time a chord is going to change at the top of the measure. Like if you look at Will the Circle Be Unbroken. Will the circle be un 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, by, right on the top of the measure it's going to change. So by and by, Lord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If you're counting that song in 4/4, it's going to change at the top of the measure. So what happens is when the chord changes, say here we're going to F. Your ear is going to demand that I play a note that's in that chord, and that's why when I say play arpeggios, play the notes that make up the chord. You're 100% correct all the time. That's why that works because you're literally changing the chord. I'm going to prove this to you by letting you hear it because it'll make more sense to you. Here's our C scale. The note that usually is going to be the one that rubs the most will be that B note. So let's say it changes to F here. There's that F sharp against that note. So if I were to play, will the circle be unbroken by right? So now I'm landing on that B note, which I just said was okay. And it is okay. The only thing is you cannot land on the top of the measure with it because it's going to sound like that. Now, the good news is that once you've established the first note of the measure for this chord, you get the rest of the measure to do what you just did, which is to play the rest of the C scale notes. Okay. Only thing you have to do is play the top of the measure, what we call a chord tone. All right. And again, if you look at the melody of "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," will the circle, there's a C note right on the top of the measure. Happens to be a C chord. When it changes, "It'll be unbroken by and by," back to a C note, which is part of an F chord, right? Still part of this F chord here. By and by, back to C. That's going to be a C chord with a G note there. G note's part of the C chord. Again, the melody is going to follow these arpeggios that we're talking about. So, if you do what we just did, the short answer is target chord tones, and that's where what was happening with you is when it was changing to F, you were probably still lingering on a note that was a little bit, maybe something like that note, you know, a note that, but it's not that bad. And again, when you're trying to survive, the tune is your starting place. That's what you do, is you just play the scale. Now as you refine it, you know that when it changes to F, you're looking for just a note in the arpeggio or the chord. Does that make sense? This is something that if we had 2 hours, I would elaborate on a lot more. But does it really make sense, or you just okay? Okay. Now what happens is when you start getting good at targeting chord tones, and this is the most important thing you can do. Targeting the chord tones is more important than playing your whole scale, because again, if I don't target a chord tone and I end up on a note that's a little bit out, that's going to get people's ear going, I don't think he knows what he's doing. But if you play a chord tone, sit there and don't try to be too fancy, they're going to say, hey, it sounds good, he knows what he's doing. So that's more important than anything else we talked about, okay? And you would target chord tones for any chord. Again, if it goes to a minor, you're going to target that note. If you don't know what the chord tones are, just make the chord and it'll be there for you, okay? What we've talked about so far is, time is getting way too short, is what's called diatonic. That's just the word that they use for staying inside the key, okay? In other words, if you're in diatonic key of C, if you're playing diatonic chords, you're playing those chords we just talked about, okay? That's just the word they use for it. Now we're going to play something that's, we're going to get into some stuff that's non-diatonic because it is a big part of music, especially the blues. So let's go back to one thing that we did earlier, and that would be, well, let me play a little something for you here, and then you'll, so you get the kind of sound in your head of what we're about to get at. This will be the major blues. Pretty cool sound, right? So that's the major blues. That's the got to translate from G here. I got. We'll just do it with. Let's go back to the major pentatonic. Okay, remember that far back. Let's go back to that. It's going to be C, playing open 4th string. All right. Now the major pentatonic is 1, 2. It's going to be D, 2nd fret. 4. It's going to be E, 4th fret. Now you skip the 4 and go to open 3, and then this will be A, 2nd fret. All right, let's do that one time together. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to add one note to that, and this will be the major blues. We're going to go 1, 2. Now we're going to add the flat 3 or a sharp 2. Okay, to be 3rd fret. Now we're not going to take anything away from the major pentatonic. We're just going to add that to it. Now we got the rest of the major pentatonic. 4, open. Now go backwards. There you go. It'll be an E flat. Back up. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you jam, do a solo with this. Okay, so that's the major blues, and that's built on the major pentatonic, and you're just adding one note, which is a flat 3. Okay, this is going to work wherever you can use your major pentatonic. In other words, if you have a 1, 4, 5, you could play C major pentatonic, C major blues, what we just did. And we're not going to go over it now, but what you would do is when it goes to F, you would change to F major blues. If you already knew your F major pentatonic, you would just add that note and build this stuff, all right? When it goes to G, you would play G major blues. The major blues is more difficult to keep up with because you have to change for each chord. That's why the major scale stuff we just did is actually easier than almost anything else. You don't have to even think as much about it other than targeting chord tones. So this blues idea that we're doing is very cool. It's only going to work over a 1, 4, 5. Like I said, if you try to introduce that blue note to any of those minor chords we just played, it's going to sound sick. You heard what it sounded like when I did that. Okay. Everybody good with that? Everybody cool? Okay. I want to talk about, there's 4 basically, like when it comes to playing scales or any of this stuff, I call it the big 4. In other words, how can you play a scale? In other words, we know that the scale works, right? That's not up for discussion, but what can we do with that scale? We don't want to just play a linear scale. Well, Jimmy Bruno calls them pitch collections, like almost like a piano. So if you get on a piano and you're in the key of C, you don't even have to worry about any black keys, right? So you could take a kid and just have him go up there and start pounding on stuff. If I'm playing a C chord, it's going to work, you know, because he's playing all notes out of the C scale, which we just did. So if you just randomly pounded out notes here and there, we know they work, all right? So same thing for us. If I'm playing, I know the notes are here. So I can randomly grab them. I can go. Now, I'm not smart enough to say in my mind, all right, I'm going to play G, B flat. I'm not that smart. All I know is that the notes work. I'm like the kid pounding on the piano. I don't know what's going to come out. I just play. So that's what I just did there. I basically created a melody because I knew that those notes would work. Okay? But there are a couple other things we can do that make it not just so random. And one of the best ones is what I call folded scales. All right, you guys remember folded scales from last year? No. This is where we put notes in a pattern, and we're not gonna. Again, I'm not gonna drill you on these today. I just want you to see what they are. Basically, they're patterns that repeat. So I could take a scale. Here's my C scale. I could play a pattern. Sorry. All right. So that's like going from the root back up to the root. It'd be a 4-note pattern, right? Now I could go down the scale. Alright. So what I did is I took my C, going down to B. Now I'm going to go down to A. In other words, I'm repeating this pattern, right? So it would sound. Right? I could go up with it. So these patterns, and those are the main ones I'm going to use, are those kind, are called folded scale patterns. And so if I'm playing eighth notes, which I tend to do in my world, I tend to play in 4/4 time and play eighth notes. So if I'm playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and right, I'm playing eighth notes that way. Now what I can do is, as long as I'm targeting chord tones when they come along, we've already talked about that. Now I can play these patterns. I play a straight scale, folded, straight, folded, straight, folded, right? I can change back and forth. And so a lot of times what you hear me doing is just mixing up straight scales and folded scales. So if I'm playing even like a 2-note folded scale, and I'm not going to drill you on these, I just want you to see what they are, because if you already know them, it'd be a waste of time. If you don't know them, they would be a little difficult to get right now, but as long as you see what they are. There's a 2-note, right? Straight, folded, 2-note folded, straight, folded. That's a lot of the variation that you hear in my playing. It's just a folded scale idea, right? So the big 4, remember this is as it applies to what scale can I play. You know, we've talked about the concept of creating solos and improvising and all that kind of stuff. But once I know my scale, what can I do with it? You can play a straight scale. Let's just say linear scale. Play a folded scale, and what I did was I took a C scale there and folded it. The third thing would be to play the arpeggio. And there's also one thing we can do there is, regretfully we are running out of time, but let me just kind of show you what this is. It's called cross picking, and that's where you play, anytime you play more than 2 strings, like here's 2 strings. That is not cross picking, but cross picking is when I play 3 strings. There's a 3-note pattern for cross picking. Cross picking would be the way you would play an arpeggio occasionally. I mean, it comes into play more for a 6-string guitar because there you got so much more ground to cover, you have to play 3 strings or more. In our case, we could play an arpeggio here on 2 strings, which would be the same for a fiddle player. That's why guitar players hate fiddle players, right? Because a fiddle player can play an arpeggio on 2 strings where it takes a 6-string player 4 strings or whatever. You know. So I could cross. Here's another pattern. You know, we could spend the whole class on cross picking. Way of playing the chord, way of playing the arpeggiating the chord, right? Another way of doing it. Okay, scales, folded scales, cross picking, and finally would be harmonized scales. This is the hardest one to get under your fingers, but remember we walked up the chords from C, and we went D minor, and we walked all the way up that way. Remember, a chord is made up of 3 notes. If we take just 2 of those out, all the rules still apply. So I can take, there's a harmonized scale. In other words, I'm taking, right, and then I'm harmonizing. Same idea here. So for example, if you took 2 of the concepts of the big 4, cross-picking and harmonized scales, you could play, sorry I missed it. You get the idea, and that as far as developing any of the concepts we've talked about today, that to me the harmonized scales would be the biggest hurdle probably. But so when you look at how we kind of do a little review right quick. Survival is going to be arpeggios, right? And when you change chords, anytime you play that chord's arpeggio, you are targeting a chord tone. That's why it ends up being 100% correct. That's why the listener's ear is going to like what they hear. When you look for melody notes, 99% of the time a melody note will land on the chord tone. Just how I illustrated that will the circle be unbroken. Every one of those chord melody notes lands on the chord that it goes to. What happens is when you're looking for melody notes, you got a 1 in 3 chance, right? Because there's only 3 notes in the chord. This is how you really start getting refined, and if you're a pretty good player, what'll happen is the song will go around one time, maybe you're playing some backup stuff and you go, okay, that wasn't it. Now you're down to 66% chance of getting it right, the next time around. And so this is how it happens. So not only are you getting better at improvising itself, you're starting to get a real ability to find the melody, which is kind of what we're all getting at too. All right, so remember you can play arpeggios, you can add the 2 notes to the arpeggio so it becomes a 5-note scale, which is what penta means. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, major pentatonic, right? You play the full major scale, as we illustrated over any of those 6 chords. Those, 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished, we throw it out. And then you got, as far as playing the C scale, you could play the straight scale, folded scale. Again, I'm covering ground I normally would cover in 2 hours, so I apologize for that. I'm just trying to get to as much as I can here. Now, one last thing. Everybody okay with that? That's sort of the review of what we've done, all right? Now, what's going to happen is when we encounter a chord that's not in the key, say we've gone through our chord selection here and we've determined what chords belong to the key of C. We know that. Now, what if we run into a chord that, and I may have to do this in a different place, but let's say here's a D minor. All right, so that belongs to the key of C. What if it's D major? A D major chord. That does not belong to the key of C. One reason we learn what chords belong to the key of C is so we'll know what chords do not belong to it, right? So what happens there is, now I have a D major chord, doesn't belong. So what do I do? Okay. Now, you will have tunes that do this. Can't think of what they are offhand, but you will have them where they go outside the key. Well, let's just say that we go with a D chord here, a D major chord. How do we survive that chord? Well, you're going to do the same. You're going to use a lot of the same things we've talked about today, right? The first thing you're going to do is what? What's the first survival skill for anything that comes up? Arpeggio, right? So I'm going along. It's going to a D major. It's like, oh, what do I do? That works, okay, right? Because it will 100% of the time work. Just remember that. One thing I can do then is if it goes outside the key, I can add to that arpeggio the flat 7. If you ever play a dominant chord or a 7 chord, what we call a 7 chord in our kind of music, always means it has the flat 7 in it. If any of you play 6-string guitar, it's that little like a D7, and that you just have to find it. But in this case, I've got my arpeggio. The flat 7 happens to be, if I were to count it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7. I flat the 7. It happens to be a C note. Let me make sure that as I'm translating here. Let me make sure that's right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I got my arpeggio. I can add the flat 7. Okay. So it's going along. So it's in the key of C. Here's C. Okay. That's the one thing you can do that we've not talked about. Now you can also play the major pentatonic. So a lot of the things we've already talked about you can do. So I got D, so I could go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. That's going to work. There's that. This is why I always usually save this for either another clinic or save it for the end, because you get actually more interesting stuff that you can do over chords that fall outside the key. That's why jazz really likes those chords. All right, one thing you can do if we can do the major pentatonic, we also could do the major blues. We talked about that, right? So I can do, here's my major pentatonic. With major blues, we add the flat third. So that works, right? And let me give you just one final thing here, just in case your mind is not completely fried. And that would be we talked about the flat 7. You can just play the scale. You just play your D scale and flat the 7. In other words, I've got a D major scale here. If I flat that note, we just found that when we added it to the arpeggio, I can just play that scale. I can play that whole 7-note scale. So I've got okay. So it's called mixolydian, in case you're wondering. Like a friend of mine, I said, some of these words are scaring people. Can I come up with another word? And he said, well, is it easier to say mixolydian or the D scale that has the flat 7 in it? You know, which is easier? And so it is. It's just one of the modes, but it's just a way with this crazy thing. We're talking about music that's diatonic. We're talking about, again, the folk music thing. There's a lot to music, and it's very complicated, but we can deal with what we have to deal with on what I think is a pretty, I hate to call it simple, but something that you can at least get your mind around. And that's what I've tried to do today. So it doesn't solve all the problems for music if you're going to start playing swing and jazz, or if you're going to start looking at scales that do not conform to a specific key. Like there are certain harmonic minors or things like that that are not derived from major scales. It's almost like they had to be created to handle certain problems. But anyway, it's not a catch-all, but it will catch almost everything we need for what we do here. Okay. Final thoughts or suggestions? Everybody okay? It seems like y'all are getting it, unless you're fooling me. It looks like you're okay. All right. Thanks for coming. All right. Anything else for you? You need anything else? Or
you.